think one of the most important things that a musical organization can do is that companionship. And people will say a lot of times, well, sports does that. And I agree. I was an athlete in high school. But one of the things that I think is different as far as an athletic team as opposed to a musical ensemble team, and this is going to sound, I don't know how to say this in a PC way, but in marching band, like you don't get benched. You're all starters. Everyone starts. If you're not really pulling your weight on the baseball team, which I've been there, you sit out for a game. You sit out for 2 games and you sort of regroup. In marching band, in concert band, in orchestra, that's not the case. Like, you all have to function at the highest level at all times. And so that individual accountability and how it relates to the ensemble as a whole is just fantastic. And it's something that I think, in my opinion, only music does.
Welcome to Director's Circle, a podcast featuring insight from music educators and school leaders discussing their philosophies towards the administrative leadership of a comprehensive music program. I'm Doug Conrad, and today's guest is Dr. Christopher Cicconi from Towson, Maryland. Let's begin. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Director's Circle. I'm Doug Conrad. Thank you so much for tuning in. The school year is underway, and like many of you, I know with the first week of school here for me, I've done a lot of things you've probably already done. Handing out the course syllabus, going over classroom expectations, whether it be raising your hand if you have a question, not talking while the instructor is speaking, or even putting your cell phone away. But while I was going over that cell phone part today, I thought, a lot of you have your phone out while you're listening to this. So if you do have your phone on you, you can do a couple things in under 30 seconds to stay updated on all future events and episodes with the podcast. You can head on over to Facebook and like our page under Director's Circle, or even go over to iTunes, Google Play Music, iHeartRadio, or even Spotify to subscribe and stay updated on all future episodes. Now, also from past episodes of the podcast, many of you know that I'm a resident of Western Maryland, and a few years ago in this area, I had the pleasure of attending a honors band festival where I was able to watch the senior high band under the direction of a guest conductor from Towson University. I was really taken away by that group and just the level of music making that they were able to attain being under the leadership of this conductor. That conductor was Dr. Christopher Cicconi, and I'm really excited to bring him on the podcast today to share his insight and ideas. To tell you a little bit more about Dr. Cicconi, Dr. Christopher Cicconi is the director of bands and orchestras and is also the assistant professor of music education at Towson University in Towson, Maryland. In addition to serving as the conductor of the Towson University Symphonic Band and Symphony Orchestra, he also teaches courses in graduate and undergraduate conducting, methods of teaching instrumental music in secondary education, and is also an instrumental music education student teacher advisor. As a strong advocate for music education and community outreach, Cicconi is in demand throughout the Mid-Atlantic region and is also a sought-after guest conductor, clinician, and guest speaker. Upon his arrival in Maryland, he has appeared as a guest band and orchestra clinician in well over 100 public and private institutions. As a guest conductor, Cicconi has appeared with all-state, all-region, and all-county bands and orchestras in numerous states around the country, including Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Georgia. Dr. Cicconi, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, glad to have you. So, to start things off, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and your professional background?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm from Youngstown, Ohio, which is in Northeast Ohio. Went to an amazing school up there for my undergraduate degree at Youngstown State University. And then upon completing my undergraduate degree, I moved to the desert and did a music education degree at Arizona State University, where I got to also do a lot of conducting and some tuba playing, and I worked with the marching band there. And after receiving my master's degree, I taught middle school band in a small district in Higley, Arizona for 8 years. And after that, I knew that I always wanted to be a collegiate band director. So I moved to Miami, went to the University of Miami for my doctoral degree in wind conducting. Actually, it was in instrumental conducting. After that, I taught at a really wonderful private school in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, called Pinecrest School. So I taught there for 3 years. And at the end of those 3 years, or halfway through the third year, the position at Towson University opened, for which I applied, and it worked out great. And so currently, right now, I am assistant professor of music education at Towson University, where I teach courses in music ed, but I also direct the symphonic band and the symphony orchestra. So that's where I am. That's in a nutshell of how I got to where I am today.
So to talk about your program a little bit at Towson, what ensembles do you oversee? And if you can also then talk a little bit about their numbers, but also are they mostly music major ensembles, or is there a good split between music majors and people that are majoring in other areas as well?
Sure. So Towson University has all the ensembles you could possibly think of, from band to orchestra, to choir, to jazz ensembles, to athletic bands, marching band, basketball band, new music ensemble, world music, percussion ensemble, which is great. So students there have a wide variety of things that they can do. The ones that I specifically oversee would be the symphonic band, which is the top concert band ensemble, and then the symphony orchestra. So those are the ones that I work with each and every semester. Within that, halfway through each semester, I pull the groups apart a little bit and sort of unofficially do a chamber concert where I'll work with a small wind ensemble, a brass ensemble, a saxophone ensemble, a string orchestra, and we'll take the group basically apart and do a concert halfway through the semester of chamber works, because kids need to understand and students need to understand it's not just about the big piece, it's about some of the smaller pieces too. So like last year we did, for one of our concerts, a small wind group did the Mozart Grand Partita, for example. And the brass choir did a few brass pieces. And the saxophone choir, actually, we do some pretty outrageous transcriptions, which is awesome. So we've done March Slav and Finale to Tchaik 4 and things like that. And so there's officially, it's the two ensembles, the band and the orchestra, that I oversee, but it's always fun to break those groups apart a little bit and work with smaller groups. Kids there really enjoy that.
Yeah, neat. So with that aspect of chamber music into your program, too, I know that is one big thing in secondary level ensembles and programs that people really push for. So with the initiative for chamber music, is that something that was part of the program when you walked in, or is that something that you implemented once you started at Towson?
Yeah, Towson has a very successful chamber music program with quintets and quartets, string quartets, brass quintets, horn choir, all of that. And so that was well established before I got there, and it was extremely successful. I dabble in it a little bit just because what it helps to do is it gives the students, sometimes like non-majors that don't get to participate in chamber music, they get to do this a little bit. And you asked about non-major participation a little bit in your question. I would say about 20% of each ensemble is comprised of non-majors. Everyone auditions. So next week we'll have auditions, and we'll have 200 kids audition for the two groups. They're blind auditions. And so, for example, for a while, my principal horn player was a non-major for 3 years. Very, very fine player. And so, but it gives these non-majors something else to sort of chew on halfway through the semester, as opposed to rehearsing the same music throughout the semester. And so it was very well established. And so basically what I'm doing is I'm building on that solid foundation that was there before me, and using the symphonic band time actually to do a lot of that. Because a lot of the chamber music that we have is non-conducted chamber pieces. And so I do some of the bigger things like brass choir and woodwind ensemble and things like that.
That's really cool. So to talk about a little bit more in depth with the program, the unique thing about your position is that you oversee both the wind band component but also the orchestral component. And sometimes in a music school, each of those ensembles will have their own director and sometimes even their own culture. But with that said, then, overseeing both of those groups, is there anything within your program that you do to maybe see a communal type of culture between each ensemble, or whenever you approach each group, do they kind of have their own mutually exclusive culture and how students interact with each other, their work within the school, or just even how you approach teaching them?
So that's a great question. My philosophy as far as music education is concerned is what I'm doing good for my students in the ensemble, and that's across the board. That's orchestra, band, that could be anything. You also mentioned culture. Culture is a very important aspect of my teaching, and I feel like the conductor is, I don't want to say exclusively responsible, but they're very responsible for the culture and how kids sort of act and react in their ensembles. And so my culture that I try to instill in my students is a safe culture, a fun culture, an open culture, a culture of approachability, collegiality, all of that. And that's not just exclusive to band or orchestra. That's exclusive to everything that I conduct. And I try my very best to do that. And I do a lot of self-reflection, or I'll do a lot of sort of student-led discussions, and we'll talk at the end of rehearsals sometimes, and I'll ask the kids, how are things going? How do you feel about this? How do you feel about the rehearsal? And I'll try to gauge their responses, and I'll take that into consideration when I'm planning my next rehearsals. I do a lot of videotaping too. If I feel like the culture of the group, if the dynamic is not quite where I would hope it would be, I'll do a lot of videotaping. I'm hypercritical of myself to see if some of that is coming from the podium, if some of the anxiousness, if we had an anxious rehearsal, am I doing that? Is that coming out in my conducting? Is that coming out in the way I speak to the kids? I'll also have kids come in maybe one or two at a time, and we'll just talk about rehearsal. Students that I know that will be open, or students that maybe I've never heard of, and I'll ask them to come in and say, hey, what did you think of band today? What did you think of orchestra today? And I'll ask them to be honest, and my kids will know they can be 100% honest with me, and know that they can confide in me with that, but they know that I will also take their responses and their feedback and implement them into my daily rehearsal. It's directors. I learned a lot from the three major band directors that I work with: Steve Gage, Gary Hill, and Gary Green. When something is sort of awry, I'll be the first one to take ownership of that and try to fix that from the podium, and sort of gauge everyone what they're doing on how they're reacting to me. So self-reflection is a big part of how I sort of establish the culture that I really want, which I've spoken about in my ensembles. It's so important, and I really push self-reflection to my student teachers, the ones that I'll go out and that I'll observe, and they'll be rehearsing, and they'll say, hey, rehearsal didn't go well. I'm like, well, did you videotape it? Like, how was your energy from the podium? How do you think you came across to the kids? If you're sitting in that ensemble, would you have been excited to be there? Or would you have been sort of uptight and anxious to be there? So I think that's maybe what you're asking. But as far as the culture of my ensembles, I take that extremely seriously.
For sure, and was certainly with reflection, that's part of a big component of any part in the Aside from the Culture, and that's really cool to hear your approach with how you can even sit down with the students one-on-one, which is a really cool thing to even get their input. So now to talk about your program, even as you kind of said, having a band background, in your position where you oversee wind band and orchestra, doing both types of ensembles, has that shaped you in any way as a musician or a conductor?
Yeah, so when I graduated from Arizona State, there weren't a lot of open jobs. And so I wanted to work. I knew I wanted to teach middle school. And there was a middle school position that opened, but the job was band and orchestra. You're the band and string teacher. And in Maryland now, in almost all of the counties, not all of them, but in almost all of the counties, when you get picked up to teach and you're hired to teach, there's not a lot of just the exclusive, I'm the director of bands anymore. It's a lot of crossover between band and orchestra, and you have to understand the pedagogy of all of those instruments. And so when I got that job in the Higley School District, I had zero string background. I conducted the Arizona State Orchestra on a few occasions, but nothing to the point where it's like talking to kids about, here's how you play a G, here's how you hold the bow. I have a lot of wind background, and so I remember when I got that job, I went out and rented a violin, and I studied violin all summer, from beginning to end. And it was nice because I was sort of learning, and then I could start troubleshooting on what my young kids would have trouble with or difficulty with, whether it was, like I said, bow grip or shifting and everything like that. And so because and I forgot to mention this, I started that school out in Arizona from the ground up. And so the kids, my first group was a fifth grade orchestra and fifth grade band. And so I would try to always stay one basically book ahead of the kids each year. And so as I was teaching them, I was building on the concepts that I was learning, but also introducing them to the new concepts. And so I did that for 8 years out there. The way you talk, so you teach band, you teach orchestra, you talk to the kids, in my opinion, and this goes back to the culture, the same way. Now, pedagogically, it's very different. But as far as doing, establishing rehearsal techniques and things like that, I do a lot of that the same way so the kids know what to expect. However, there are certain things I feel like that work better with band than they do with orchestra. So I remember rehearsing a group back when I taught middle school, a very difficult string passage in a classical arrangement that we were doing. And I kept having them slow down. I'm like, all right, let's do it slower. Now in winds, that works great. And so I'm like, let's slow this down, and then we'll start building it back up to the right speed. And in strings, it doesn't. And I didn't really know that until I called my university professor, because I wasn't doing a good job. And I'm one of those people that if I'm not doing it right, I need to call someone to come in and watch me and watch me teach it. So I called one of my university professors. She came out and watched, and she's like, well, you can't do that slow. And I'm like, well, why? It works with winds. She's like, it does not work with strings. I'm like, you've got bow distribution, you've got the bow pacing, you've got how much of the bow are we using, the articulation. Like if you're trying to slur 12 notes at that slow of a tempo, it's not going to work just because of the tempo. So she's like, I suggest doing this. And she gave me alternate ways of thinking about doing it, so it was more successful for the string kids. So my rehearsal technique, it varies slightly between the symphony orchestra and the symphonic band. But the way in which I go about doing things is pretty much the same. I forgot to mention with the orchestra, which is great, is Dr. Jeff Howard, who's a wonderful colleague at Towson. He's the professor of violin. He actually comes in 1 hour a week and works on some of the really advanced pedagogical techniques with the group that I can't speak to. And so that he started that last year. And that partnership has been extremely valuable.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that I can empathize with. I remember once I had a interview a couple of years ago for a teaching position where it was very much like that, where it wasn't just band, but it was also a component of it was orchestra. And right. Knowing that on my resume I had a band background, the interview panel would ask me, so what is your proficiency like on strings? And only having one semester of that in college, my only response would be, I can play a scale and turkey on the straw really well. So,
yeah,
But anyway, even with that though, like, it's really cool to hear how you implement a lot of, teaching practices that, that we'd even see a lot in public school educators utilize, like, as you mentioned, a lot of reflection, but even a lot of yourself picking up an instrument to learn with your students and to be able to speak from firsthand experience, but also in that aspect of somewhat like a co-teaching aspect, how you bring your colleague in to work. That's really unique to hear how you implement those practices, even so much that could be unique for your music education students to observe that type of interaction too.
And that was my next follow-up to that. I don't get to see, because college kids are stretched very thin, and they're taking core classes and music ed classes and practicing. So there's sometimes I would love for there to be a rehearsal techniques class, which there's not. There's just not the time for it. And so as a music educator with mostly music education students in my groups, I try to model a lot of rehearsal technique and how to sort of fix things and how to troubleshoot passages to my students, to the point where if we're playing something in band, for example, and it's not going well, I'll talk to my students before I get into how to fix it. I'll say, future music educators, how am I going to fix this? Like, what are the ways to fix this? And I'll elicit their responses, and they'll say, slow it down or break it up piece by piece and things like that. I'll also do things where I do a lot of things wrong. And so I'll rehearse something or I'll say something, and I'll think to myself, I'm not explaining this the right way. And I'll talk to the kids. I'm like, all right, and I have no problem doing this to myself, essentially. I'm like, all right, future music educators, what did I do there that basically wasn't right? And they'll say, oh, you talked about a certain passage and how we should fix it, but you didn't go back and actually sort of solidify it by having us play it. And I'm like, great. And so I'll do a lot of, hey, watch what I'm doing and how this can work with your, and how you would work with your ensembles this way. But I'll even do some of this is how, look what I did. You shouldn't do what I just did.
For sure. So even with that then, as you mentioned, you had worked with music education majors. So could you talk a little bit about your interaction as part of the music ed faculty, maybe what types of courses you teach, and
Sure.
Do you work with only instrumental students, or do you oversee everybody that is also like a vocal major or of the like?
Okay. Yeah. So I was actually hired. My title is Assistant Professor of Music Education. And one of the things that was so appealing about the job at Towson was the music education component. I'm an educator before I'm a conductor. I'm an educator before I'm anything. That's what I wanted to do my whole life. I just had to figure out what part of education I was going into, and music presented itself partway through my high school career. So when I first came to Towson, I taught the brass methods class, which is basically teaching all the music ed kids how to play. It's your instrumental methods classes. So I taught the kids how to play the brass instruments. I taught them how to teach the brass instruments, a little bit of instrument repair with regard to brass, because I'm a brass player. And so when I ended up doing the orchestra my second year, I no longer taught methods, but the class that I teach every year is I teach the last class that my music ed majors take before they go out and student teach. And it's basically teaching instrumental music in secondary schools. So we have 2 instrumental music education faculty members. We have 3 now, which is great. But for my first 4 years, we had 2. My very fine colleague, Melissa McCabe, she handles, and her specialty is elementary music education, and mine's secondary. And so we team teach that class, and this is the last thing that they take before they go student teach. And so in that class, it meets once a week, but it is a whirlwind of 15 classes, and we cover everything from rehearsal technique. We do ear training. I help them prepare for their praxis test that they have to take to get certified. We talk about repertoire selection. We talk about entrepreneurship. We talk about how to write a resume and a cover letter to present yourself to future employees. We have supervisors come in from the counties, because Maryland is set up in, I think there's 22 counties, and every county has a music supervisor. So they'll come in at the end and do mock interviews with the kids and give them feedback and say, hey, I'll see you in about, 2 or 3 months when I actually interview you for real. I look forward to the progress that you're making. It's basically an all in all, like, let's get ready for student teaching and for a job. I make them write a budget. I make them plan a field trip to Disneyland. And so all of these real world things that they have to do that they may not be ready to do when they go out and teach. And so that's that's my main music education class that I teach. And in the spring, I take part of those kids, and I'm their intern supervisor out in the field. I teach conducting as well. So we have 2 sets of that. I teach intro to conducting in the fall, and then I teach like their last conducting class in the spring.
So one unique thing I heard there was in your music education course, before they enter the field in their student teaching experience, just the breadth of topics that you walk them through. Because in most college programs, that semester before student teaching, there will be that course that is very focused on what you might want to do if I want to be a secondary band director, an elementary general music teacher, or whatever. But just the topics you talked about, obviously there's always a component of resume writing or going out with some job interview tactics. But But it was really cool about how you talked about even with aspects that are non-musical, as such as the budgetary aspect,
Right.
or even other things with that. So I didn't know if you could talk a little bit about that being a little bit of a unique thing that I've never heard from anybody before. Can you talk a little bit about your approach in with your music ed majors as they enter the profession? How do you go about working with them to teach them those, you could say, more administrative tasks or the non-musical
Sure.
aspects of the job?
Well, and there was one part of your question that I didn't get to. In that class, it's all the senior instrumental music ed students. So percussion, string students, brass students, woodwinds. And so with that being said, when I got to my first job and they're like, here's your budget. And I'm like, I don't. So what do I do? And so with the budget part of it, we talk everything about where's the money coming from. And we talk about different ways to do fundraising. We talk about sort of things like tax credit donation. We talk about all of that and how that is your source of income. I also talk to them about, as far as like tax credit donations and things like that. I'm like, we also talk about make sure when you're doing all of these things, you're getting your principal's permission. Don't just start a fundraiser without seeking approval from somebody and finding out who that somebody is. So we talk about the money that comes in, but then I really make them outline. So let's say they have a budget of $2,000. Then we really have to outline how that money is going out. Everything from, are you buying reeds for your kids and how you're being reimbursed from that? If you're buying music, don't just put you're going to spend $300 in music. Like, I want you to go, they have to go on Pepper or another site or FJH, and they go on there and they outline the music they'd like to do for the year, the proposed music they're going to do, how much it's going to cost, and they'll put, this piece, like pick your piece, Cajun folk song, and that's $100 and some. Well, there's a big chunk out of your budget. So how are you going to supplement the rest of it? If you have a marching band, and so when they do their budget, I let them pick their dream job. And so some kids will pick middle school band, some will pick middle school orchestra, some will pick high school band. And so if it's a high school band thing, they have to go the extra step and tell me how they're going to run their marching band. What is their booster program going to look like? In the end, they write a giant program handbook that outlines their entire program and everything they'll be doing for the year, everything from repertoire to uniform cleaning to all that. And the nice thing about that is all my kids that have done that basically just take that program handbook and take the fake name of the school off that they made, and they'll just insert the school where they're now employed, and they'll tweak the handbook a little bit, and then they're ready to go. Because a lot of those things that they're not ready for that. Like that could be a real, when I started both jobs, like when they're like, well, what's your program handbook look like? I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And so they're ready, and they're ready to hand that. And a lot of them will take that handbook and a thing like a budget, and those different kind of artifacts that we've made, or like a field trip plan where they even everything to what bus company they're going to use to hire and how they're going to do bids for bus companies and things like that. They'll hand that to future employers and say, here's some things that I've thought about and I've talked through, and they'll show that side of the administration thing and the organizational thing.
That's certainly a thorough approach. So in addition to the administrative tasks associated with the job, what are the biggest musical skills that you want your students to have before they enter the workforce?
Oh man, ears. Ears is number one. I've worked very hard over the last. We have all worked very hard over the last 4 and now into my 5th year. What are they hearing? And I've seen some of my kids, they'll get in front of a group back in my 1st and 2nd year, and I'll see this glorious and glamorous conducting, which is great, but what's coming out of the ensemble sort of has nothing to do with what I'm seeing on the podium. And so my kids know that when they're out in the workforce and they're doing their thing out in whatever county they're in, I'm always a resource to them. So when my kids go out or when they go out for their first job, they know if they're struggling, they can call me and I'll be out there to see, give some feedback. I take pride in, all of our kids here getting jobs, but more importantly, they know that I'm still a resource after they've graduated. And so my biggest thing, and I'm working on this a lot this year, is what are you hearing? What does the ensemble sound like? What are your kids saying to you musically? What are they saying to you non-musically to you? So there are a lot of errors happening in band rehearsal today? What are you hearing? Like, where are they? And if they can't hear that, well, let's play it again and let's sort of break the band apart or break the orchestra apart. Like, at least what side of the room do you hear the mistakes coming from? Error detection for me is a serious focus, especially this coming year, because a lot of counties now will do that. They'll get in front of a band, and the band will play. And part of the audition process is you need to make them sound better. Is this rhythm right? Who's not playing this rhythm right? Or all of that. And so my biggest musical thing for them, I mean, conducting is obviously important, and leading an ensemble is important, but you can lead an ensemble only so far. But in the end, what are you hearing, and how are we fixing that, and what kind of pedagogy or rehearsal techniques, or what does our plan show that how we're going to fix that?
Yeah, that's certainly a lot. And I know even it was cool here you talk about just even how to have their ears built, because I know even there is a professor of music, his name is Brett Pimentel. He is a teacher of woodwinds at Delta State University in the South, and he has a big blog online that a lot of woodwind doublers like myself look up from time to time. But he even has a component, one article that is labeled, that had a lot of hits on social media, where what did my core group of classes as an undergraduate music major affect me as a professional musician? That was the largest thing he even talked about, just even having the ears, like if you're even doing like woodwind juries at the end of a semester, being able to hear that. And I can even know myself, like once I first started my job in education, that was one of the biggest areas where I was lacking. Just not that I wouldn't be able to sight sing, but just hearing something on the spot and being able to fix it. That's definitely a large part. So
Yes.
when you guys go about building that kind of skill set in your students, maybe in supplementing what they might go through in their music theory curriculum, is there anything specific to a rehearsal setting you get them to kind of think about when you approach the by ear methods or anything like that?
So we have there's a bunch of answers to that question. One, I'll ask in my symphonic band and my orchestra, like, what are you hearing? Or there's a wrong note. Can you guys hear what that is? And hopefully the person that played the wrong note just doesn't raise their hand and say it's me. I get them thinking that way, like where's the wrong, where's the intonation issues? But we've my colleague and I have developed we call it skills lab, where the kids meet. It's tough. They meet 8 a.m. on Mondays, and every kid plays a second or a third or even sometimes a fourth instrument. And the cohorts are nice and big. So if we have 20 kids in a cohort, well, that's a 19-piece band playing instruments that they don't know how to play. And it's string instruments and it's wind instruments. We really don't use percussion instruments for that, just because it's the logistics of it. And so putting their friends in like that and getting them to start to hear, because they'll make mistakes. Those, our college kids, they'll make a lot of mistakes on second and third instruments. And so, like clarinets, for example, are you playing a B flat or a B natural down there, or in alto saxophones, is it an F sharp or an F natural? And the kids need to hear that, and they're assessed on that. Sometimes the airs we'll put in the parts on purpose for sort of planned air detection, but sometimes we don't need it, because they'll read like grade 2 music on their secondary instrument, and as the educator, as whichever student is conducting the kids through the piece, I'll stop them and say, okay, what are you hearing? Where are the wrong notes? Like what's happening? And we'll try to draw their attention that way. And it's a slow process at first, because they're using their ears not in the way that they're used to. Now, our theory and musicianship classes prepare them very well as far as hearing intervals, dictation, and all that. And they come in with a really strong background to that. But when you have not a piano, but when you have 18 or 19 kids sitting in front of you, and the masses of them are not playing right notes or not playing right rhythms, that's a different kind of listening. And how are we going to fix that? And so that skills lab, I wish we could do more of it. That group meets every morning, and it's a required class that they have to take. And it's primarily based on air detection. What are we hearing? But on the flip side of that, are you getting better on a secondary instrument as you're sitting in the ensemble playing a clarinet and you're a trombone player? Because in the end, if you're going to go teach band, you have to have some kind of pedagogical knowledge, and you need to be able to make and produce a decent sound, a decent tone on all of those instruments to demonstrate those for your kids. And that's another ear thing too. What's coming out of the instrument, and how does that sound? And is that a characteristic tone that you want your kids to play with? Because you could say to a fifth grader, no, try this, no, try this. But if you could pick up a clarinet and play this note the way you want it to sound, those kids, especially that learn by hearing, really can grab onto that and relate to that. And so that's the primary, as far as hearing and air detection, sort of concept that we use now. Now, I'll integrate that a lot into my intro to conducting class that's going to start meeting for the first time this year. And we'll do a lot of that. And there's a lot of resources and textbook that have air detection exercises and things like that in it.
So to kind of go along with that topic in somewhat of a ways, a large component of any medium of music in preparing for performance is score study. So could you talk a little bit about your own personal approach to score study and rehearsal preparation for your ensembles at Towson?
Oh, man. That's something I could talk about that for, forever. So score study is of the utmost importance. Score study with regard to what's going on in the music, and score study with regard to how you're going to take what you've studied and make an informed rehearsal plan. Let me see, where do I even start? So when I get a new score, and if I'm doing a new piece with my group, the first thing that I do a lot of listening. So I have composers that I sort of gravitate to. But I do a lot of listening. All summer, I do a lot of traveling. And much to the dismay of my wife and children, I listen to a lot of band music and a lot of orchestra music in the car. And discovering new composers. Like I discovered Omar Thomas last year, who's a wonderful composer. And we did one of his pieces at my last band concert last year. And it was just fantastic. And it was so well received. And I had never done a piece like that before. And so I'll do a lot of listening, a lot. I usually have a theme. So this year's theme is Music Without Boundaries. And it's nice because the School of the Department of Music, actually the whole College of Fine Arts and Communication, they've sort of set forth a theme for the year. And this year it's Arts Without Boundaries. And so my concert is Music Without Boundaries. And so I'll start thinking of pieces that sort of stretch the boundaries in all ways. And so as I'm listening, I always have that in mind. Or if there's a composer that I like and I haven't, I'll look through the rest of his or her catalog. If there's a composer that I have not used or I have not done work from, I'll reach out to them. I'll reach out to band director groups. I'll look at past programs from Midwest. I'll look at programs from CBDNA and all that. And I'll start to sort of formulate a list of things that I want to do, and I'll listen to it. And so I have that list now. So the next thing, obviously, to do is to order the scores and see how expensive they are, and that's depressing. And I'll start to dive into the music that way. So the first thing that I'll do when I get a piece of music is I'll listen through it with a recording, and then I'll get rid of that recording. So then my sort of informed interpretation isn't something that I've already heard in my head. But I do want to make sure is what I'm hearing is what I'm seeing on the page. Then I do what I call sort of a score study flow chart, and I do a lot of professional development workshops on this, where I'll break the piece up sort of, it's macro and micro, but it's not too micro where it's going to take hours and hours to do. So I'll do like a form analysis of the piece where everything from the different sections, is this the A section, is this the B section? I'll do a little description, like what is the melody, what key are we in, what's the meter, what are the dynamic ranges in this section, and I'll build this chart. And I make my kids do it for every single thing they conduct for their conducting class. They have to turn in what I call sort of a flow chart. I'll do a little trajectory line, basically like, you know how you get hooked up to like a monitor and the lines go up and down, hopefully. I'll do that, and I'll try to find where the trajectory of the piece is. Like, where is the big impact point? Where are we going to? Where are we going? And then where are we moving from there? And so I'll do that. I'll make a flow chart of the entire piece, no matter how big or how small. It could be Granger's A Straight Up Country Tune, which is the score is, I think, 4 pages. Or last year we did The Pines of Rome, which is, I don't know, it's a lot of pages. So I'll do that, and then I'll take that chart, and I'll take everything from that chart, and I'll put it into the score. so I can see it. And people use all kinds of things when marking a score. They'll use, I've seen everything from one color to no color to 15,000 colors. I use two colors. I basically use blue and red. So I'll use red for everything that is sort of musical, and I'll use blue for everything that is sort of non-musical. And I'll take that entire chart and I'll put it into the score. And then I'll take that chart and I'll start developing lesson plans and warm-up routines that will reflect the piece of music. And a lot of times I'll see band directors, like our big thing is, all right, here's the B-flat scale, go, in quarter notes. But how is that B-flat scale played at quarter notes reflective, or how is that preparing you for the piece that you're about to play? So you saw me do, I think, John Mackey's Undertow, which is in, A-flat / F minor. And so what I'll do is when I work on that piece, like our warm-up will be in the key of the piece that we're about to play. So kids already start to wrap their brain around the fact that I need to play a D-flat concert. The other thing is we're not going to do it in quarter notes because that doesn't really exist in that piece. We're going to do it in 7/8, 4/4. So the first measure might be in 7/8, and the next measure will be in 4/4 because that piece jumps back and forth between 7/8 and 4/4. And so now I've covered the key, and I've covered the primary, the metric shifts in my warm-up. So the kids are already learning about the piece before they've even looked at it, because I've done the study and I've sort of informed myself on what some of the issues. So if kids are not used to playing in 7/8, I'm going to cover that in the warm-up where everyone's playing in 7/8 at the same time, as opposed to trying to put it in a piece when it's already much harder because the notes, you're not playing a scale in 7/8. So I'll take that and put it in the warm-up so they've already prepared themselves without knowing that. And so I use the warm-up a lot to sort of set up what I'm about to do with the ensemble.
Yeah, and especially with score marking, too, because that is something depending on who you talk to in the field. And sometimes it can be generational things. Maybe a lot of the older demographic of directors, a lot of people say use the whole rainbow cluster of colors for every little marking, but there are some even too that are very much minimalist, where unless it's a number 2 graphite, don't mark anything else. So yeah, it's very much into their own method. So it's really cool to hear that approach.
One thing, if I could add just really quick, one thing I do, and Gary Green did this with me, and it was really awesome. Like I used to mark, and I still mark a lot, and I'll do harmonic analysis and all that. If I'm doing a Beethoven symphony, I'll do a lot of harmony analysis. The one thing that I will do is for almost everything that I do, I always buy 2 scores. And so like I'll buy a study score that I absolutely destroy. And that's the score that I'll also rehearse from. And Gary Green told me this, and he saw one of my scores, like, this is very well informed, this is great. But he's like, I don't want you staring at all this color when you end up looking down at the concert. And he was absolutely right, in my opinion. And so what I started doing is I'll buy a blank score. And maybe that blank score will have a few cues in it that I know, like, I really have to make sure I cue this. But other than that, it's completely white. Like it is, there are almost 0 markings in that. And I found that to be great because then in the concert, I'll start to think of the piece more holistically, as opposed to looking down and seeing 6,000 cues and all these articulations highlighted and dynamics highlighted. You start to lose a sense of where the piece is going when it's picked up. Now you've picked it apart in rehearsal, but then when you come back to the concert, you're looking more for the big picture. And so I've adopted that from him. That's all I do now.
Oh, wow, that's definitely a cool idea. Because that's definitely something, too. I remember, like, from student teaching, I did Cajun folk songs. And,
sure.
I remember, like, my co-op gave me the score to that, but it was that kind of thing where I had all the markings, too. But by the end of, and especially with that being the first piece out in the field that you conduct, that's the only thing I'm taking home every night. So
right.
I remember, like, even after the end of, like, my 17 weeks, I think I even, like, got and it was, like, a Meredith music, so with their music, it's, like, in body armor with the outer cover. So I just remember even, like, using it so much that even, like, the staples were starting to come off. So that's definitely a cool idea, too. So now, to kind of talk a little bit in that direction now, another area that you're also very passionate about is the topic of repertoire selection. And I also know that you have recently published a book in just the past few years. It's called the Band Music Handbook, a catalog of emerging band repertoire. So
right.
Could you talk a little bit about this book and how you came about writing this book and finding pieces of music to include in it?
Well, if you know the David Daniels book, and the David Daniels book is the book as far as orchestral repertoire is concerned, and I think it's in its 5th or 6th edition now. It's an amazing resource if you're looking through music or you're not sure what instrumentation is this, or you need a 5-minute piece or anything like that. You go to the Daniels book. So my book, it's not as in depth as that because it's just me working on it. It's basically a index of as much band music from the last, let's see, I forget what that is. So the last 20 or so years, like newer band music, because before 1995, you have different encyclopedias that index a lot of the band music. So mine is more of the contemporary stuff. And so that's, you'll see John Mackey and you'll see Brian Baumages and you'll see Eric Whitacre and David Maslanka and all of these people that don't have they've got their websites, but there's not a comprehensive listing of all their music. And so this book does that. As far as picking the music, I tried to pick it all and put it in there. And in there, if you look inside, basically what every entry will show. And so if it's David Maslanka's Symphony Number 4, it'll have the title, and over to the right it'll have how long it is, and then right underneath it'll have the actual and I sort of used Daniel's formula, and I adapted it to band music. But basically, there's a numeric formula that I use that shows the exact instrumentation. So if you have certain instruments, you can use it, or you can do it. Because a lot of times conductors are like, well, I don't know what the instrumentation is. I'm not sure if I can do this. And so this book is and was supposed to be sort of the answer to that. Well, I can go look in here and see, this Granger, well, not because Granger's not in there, but this piece has 6 different clarinet parts. Well, I can't do that yet because I only have 4 clarinets in my band. And so then they save themselves from buying it, and then maybe they buy it and they save it, for a time when they have the right instrumentation. So there's thousands of entries for that. Then in the back, I have every piece listed by composer, so there's a composer index, and then there's every piece is listed by duration. So if you're looking for a 2 or 3 minute piece and you're stumped, you can go to the back of this book, and then there'll be literally hundreds of options for you with the name of the piece and the composer. Then you can go in its index, so it's cross-referenced, so then there'll be a page number. And so let's say you want to do Shortcut Home by Dana Wilson. Well, I think that's a 2 or 3 minute piece, and you can look and see, that's on page 82 of the book, and then rip back through there and see, I have all the instrumentation. This is a cool piece. I'm going to go listen to it. This will work. And so that resource, that was the intention of that, is to be that kind of resource for the band directors, which we don't have, but the orchestra world has it. And so my plan for that was to offer band directors that resource. And so that's how the idea for this book came along.
So if somebody wanted to look into purchasing the book, where would they go about to maybe find that resource?
It's anywhere. I even saw it on Target.com one time. Through the publisher, Rowan and Littlefield is probably the best place, but Amazon has it, Barnes and Noble has it. Any online bookseller will have it. I'm hoping that the second edition will come out within the next year. I have a lot more ideas that I wanted to add into it. So I'm just trying to provide a resource for people to go, or a book on the shelf that if you need to look quickly at something, there it is for you. It's tough too, because it's also stuff that you can dig into online. But this is sort of a comprehensive text where everything's sort of in your hand. Sorry, the other part of your question, I don't know, did you say about choosing music for your ensembles?
Yeah, so to kind of go along with that about a little bit, if you could talk a little bit about how maybe this is a topic that you are very well known for, maybe your own approach to how you go about selecting music for your own ensembles at Towson.
So this is if there's anything in music education that I'm passionate about a lot of things, but if you want to talk about the number one most intense or most passionate aspect of music education, it would be that. It's how do we pick music for our kids? How do we pick the music that we're going to play? Why did I pick this piece and not these other 600 million pieces to do? That's so important to me. And I presented last year at Midwest on this very topic. And a lot of times young directors, well, I played this in high school. I'm going to do this with my groups now. Or I really like this piece and I'm going to do this now, which those are both two very, very valid reasons to do something. If you've played it and you like it, do it. But the next part of that is, well, are you digging down deep into the score to know if that's appropriate? Because you can make or break a concert. You can actually, or as far as the education of your kids, like what kind of experience are you giving them? And that's directly related to the music that you're giving them. So, for example, if you pick something that's too hard, like completely over their head, and you keep digging and digging and digging, are the kids going to enjoy that rehearsal process? Is the end result going to be worth everything they went through to learn that? The answer is I don't know. My opinion is, well, no. Like, how are we finding the things that are the most educational for our kids? What concepts in the music are there that we're using as educational tools to teach our kids? Are we honest with ourselves? And that's a big thing. And I'll always ask directors, hey, how's the group this year? How's your group? And they'll be like, oh, it's awesome. I've got really strong clarinets. I've got really strong trumpets, which is great. And so I always ask directors, how honest are we with ourselves with how great our groups are? And once you've really thought about that, then we need to honestly choose the music that will highlight that. Like if we have, for example, for me, and I can tell you this, every year since I've been at Towson, I've wanted to do the Paul Lavender arrangement of West Side Story. It's very hard. And so I purchased it, I think, my first year here. And it sat on my desk for 2.5 years until we can do it. Well, why? Because what will happen is, like, the first week of classes, kids will come in and they'll audition. And so because I've done all the score study for that, I know all the problem spots. I know we have to have a killer lead trumpet player. I know I have to have the right horns. I have to have the right amount of percussion. I have to have and percussion's always a big thing. Do you have enough percussion, and do you know the composer? So I know if I'm doing a Mackey piece, there's a lot of percussion, and I do a lot of his music. And so that's one of the things I always ask. I'm like, how many percussion players will I have? Because I want to do it. And you know what? The piece deserves it. The piece deserves to be played well. I firmly believe the reason that we still do Beethoven and Mozart is because A, it's good music, but B, a lot of great groups have played it really well for the last couple hundred years. So the band music is very young compared to orchestra music, but we have great pieces of music that need to sort of stand the test of time, and so they need to be played well. So back to what I was saying, I keep waiting. In my first semester, we didn't quite have the right people in the right place, and then the second semester, same thing. And I'm waiting. And finally, it was actually my fourth semester at Towson. We got through everything, and I'm like, we have it. Like, I have the right people. I have the right instruments in the right places. I have the right amount of players, so we can finally do this. And it was extremely successful. On the flip side, we have to also be ready. And I don't want this to sound the wrong way, but like last year with one of my groups, we got halfway through the year with a piece, and it was at that point, it was above us. It was really hard, and the kids were stressing about it. I was stressing about it, and it was causing a lot of tension in the classroom atmosphere. And so, like, I pulled the piece halfway through the semester. I'm like, this is not the right time. Now I have that piece on my desk, and we're going to try it again. Well, I believe so, and we have auditions this week, but I have the people that can play it this semester, which is most of them that were in their last semester. And they were very disheartened, but we had a long talk about it. And after the concert was over, the kids were like, it was the right choice to pull that piece. We weren't ready for it pedagogically. I think understanding all the concepts that went along with it, it was just the wrong time. And so I really asked directors to really think about, the music that they're picking, and does it fit the group in a way that sets everyone up for success. You can challenge kids, don't get me wrong, and I challenge my kids every day, and I challenge honor groups every day. But there is a point where you want to be careful where it doesn't go to the point where the kids are sort of not physically able to play. Like if all four trumpet parts are above the staff the entire time, but you only have one kid that can play above the staff, and you're trying to develop the other kids' range a little bit. Maybe that's not the right time to do that piece. Maybe wait till everyone is actually playing up there comfortably, so they're not sort of, I don't know what the right word is, anxious about doing that.
Yeah, and that's even a cool thing how you mentioned even while that one piece you had mentioned in a previous year might have just been a bit above a group, that's one of those things about even just for music ed majors to learn in rehearsal that sometimes, because I even remember too, like a lot of my friends, once we first entered the field, when it came close to concert time, sometimes those decisions are needed to be made, but
yes,
and that's even sometimes, do I have the gumption to do that? And it's a tough decision to make. Yeah, and it's really cool to hear, especially like being just with that transparency, because sometimes that can just come from a director-only approach, which there's nothing wrong with, but getting student input on as well, and then
right.
even getting them to realize that that's a really cool idea to see how that's a communal effort too. You know what I mean?
Right.
When that kind of time has to come.
I pulled the kids too. Like I'm like, listen, this is what I'm thinking. This is, and I gave them all the justification, and their big thing was like, well, we don't want to let you down. I'm like, you would never, like, my kid, they don't let me down. You would never do that. Like, I'm looking out for you. I want this. And the concert was a great success. Once we changed the piece, I did a little bit of an easier piece by the same composer. And I tell the kids this, and I tell directors this. You have one shot. Like, that ensemble only exists once. Like, so my fall semester band will only exist one time in the history of everything, really, and then it changes. Because kids come in or kids leave or kids graduate or kids, for some reason, they can't play in the next semester. So that group is made up of those kids only one time. And so I have one shot to get it right. And the stress that causes, because I want to get it right. And I do a lot of research on the music because I'll never see that group as that group again. And that's kind of like, I don't want it to be like a morbid way of thinking of it, but it's a special thing. And you have one shot to really make that impact on them. And I think a lot of the success comes straight from picking the right music for them that they're going to be most successful with.
For sure. So now let's move on to some questions that we ask all guests. Can you tell us about one or two of your favorite rehearsal tactics?
All my rehearsals are set up the same way in that I really approach everything from a macro, micro, macro level. And those are sort of buzzwords. The point of a rehearsal is to be better than when you started. So I'll take a piece, and this comes from score study. I'll take a piece and I'll take a passage. I'm like, all right, in my brain, I'm going to go from rehearsal A to B. Or if it's orchestra, we're doing a Beethoven symphony. We're going to play the exposition. And what we'll do is I will barrel through that section, no matter what. And the kids will hear, oh my gosh, this sounds terrible, or we're falling apart. And even if it starts falling apart, like as long as the wheels haven't completely come off, I'll get from rehearsal A to rehearsal B without stop. I'll try. And usually that works. I mean, it doesn't sound the best, but it works. And what happens is the kids' ears are already in tune to where the problem spots are. And that approach that's the macro part. So we get a big picture there. And so then I'll start dissecting that section as far as like, all right, let's work on rhythm, or let's work on note accuracy, or let's work on musical phrasing, let's work on balance and blend. And so I'll pick at the big part of my rehearsal is that I'll start picking things apart in the order in which I feel is most important. So like I really try to make sure that we're getting the rhythms right first. I want to make sure that we're like the note accuracy is there. Are we matching articulation? Those come a little bit later, and then musical phrasing is usually a little bit more towards the end. I try to do musical phrasing at the beginning when they can't play the rhythms and the notes. And so then I'll pick that apart, and then at the very end, no matter what, I'll run the same section again. And what that does is, and I'll talk to the students. I'm like, so what do you think? I'm like, wow, I really feel like in these last 50 minutes, we've come so far because I gave them that initial run through where they heard whatever it is that they heard, and then at the end they hear the progress that they've made, and so they leave rehearsal feeling good about what they did. And we've all done this, and I know I've done it, where we've all been in rehearsals, or we've all actually run rehearsals where it's nothing but nitpicking the entire time, then there's no sort of culminating effect or event at the end that brings everything back together. And sometimes those rehearsals can be discouraging, and a lot of times the retention from those rehearsals is far less than a rehearsal where you run the thing at the end again.
For sure. So another big area as we've talked a lot about in the curriculum of music education majors in their undergraduate experience, is developing a philosophy of education. So could you talk a little bit about yours, and to answer the broader question of why do we teach music in schools?
Oh my goodness. So if you were to read my philosophy of music education, and I actually had to, when I applied at Towson, I had to submit it. The first sentence of my philosophy of education says, is what I'm doing is what I'm doing, and I'm sort of paraphrasing, good for kids. Like, is everything that I'm thinking about, is the way I'm talking to my kids, is the music that I'm putting in front of them, our interactions off the podium and on the podium, is what I'm doing good for my kids. That's the guiding principle for everything that I do. I mean, music, obviously, I'm a huge advocate for it, and it needs to be taught in the schools because it does so many more things than just playing an instrument. I look at the Towson University marching band, for example, and you're getting ready to come to school at a university with 26,000 students where you may, or 23,000, I think that's the number, you may have come from a small county in, a rural part of Maryland where you had 8 kids in your marching band. Now all of a sudden you're coming to a marching band where there are 300. And that could be such a daunting thing, but all of a sudden you're coming to a school where there's 20,000 students. All of a sudden you're jumping into an organization, a musical organization, where you already have 200 kids with the same beliefs, with the same ideals, with the same interests as you. And so music builds a serious companionship. I know when I went to high school, out of middle school, I joined the marching band immediately, and it was the companionship and the friends that I made on the first day are still friends that I have today. I mean, music does all kind of things. It builds confidence. It allows you for self-expression in a way that a lot of other things can't. But I think one of the most important things that a musical organization can do is that companionship. And people will say a lot of times, well, sports does that. And I agree. I was an athlete in high school. But one of the things that I think is different as far as an athletic team as opposed to a musical ensemble team, you don't, and this is going to sound, I don't know how to say this in a PC way, but in marching band, like you don't get benched. You're all starters. Like everyone starts. If you're not really pulling your weight on the baseball team, which I've been there, you sit out for a game. You sit out for 2 games and you sort of regroup. In marching band, in concert band, in orchestra, that's not the case. Like you all have to function at the highest level at all times. And so that individual accountability and how it relates to the ensemble as a whole is just fantastic. And it's something that I think, in my opinion, only music does.
So what leaders have inspired you in your career, and what have you taken away from them?
There's a lot. I think I have a lot of leaders. So Larry Snell was my high school band director. And he was the first one that said, you're really, well, I can tell you this. He's the one that changed me from saxophone to the tuba. Sorry. I was not a very good saxophone player. He's like, you should play the tuba. And I played the tuba, and it was the right thing. Larry Snow inspired me to be everything that I try to be today. He was an amazing human being. Partway through my high school career, he's like, you should go into music. You would be great. I ended up studying teaching with him. He was such a positive influence in my life throughout high school. So he would be one. Steve Gage is another one. Dr. Gage is the director of bands at Youngstown State University. And he was just fantastic. And I've never met a person that really advocates more for their students and more for the people in and out of, and he still advocates for me now. And I haven't been at YSU. I graduated in 2000. I've never had someone care and that is more genuine with their students than that person. Everything that I am with my kids today, I try to be him in a way that I can do it, not to be sort of. I need to be genuine to myself, but he's such a genuine and such a caring, but such an amazing musician and human being. he really made me realize I wanted to do what he did, and he helped and still helps in every way possible. And so as far as leaders, or as far as people that, I can go on, the list goes on. My father was one of those people, because he was the one that really instilled hard work in me. He was not a musician, but he was one of the most hardworking people you will ever meet. And I remember between high school and college, I got a little bit lazy, and he's like, you need to understand what a collegiate degree will do. And I'm like, well, how am I going to understand that? He's like, well, you're going to come with me in Youngstown, Ohio, and you're going to work at the steel mill with me this summer. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. And he's like, it wasn't a question. And so I ended up working at a steel mill for 2 summers. And he's like, and I was, oh my gosh. And to this day, it's the hardest thing I've ever done. But it sort of reshaped how I think about how important my education was, and how important it was to really work hard to get what I wanted, to get where I wanted to be. And so my father was a major, if not the part of that in my life.
That's really cool to hear his approach to especially helping you out just in that part, getting into the experience with the steel mill. I know, especially growing up in central Pennsylvania, a lot of my friends,
yeah, sure,
there wasn't obviously steel mills there, but a big thing that was in town was a paper mill, and
yeah.
It's very much that labor intensive kind of work. And I remember once you're in high school, that's when people can start getting those types of industrial jobs. And a lot of my friends, even at the end of the school year, and then you'd maybe see them back at band camp. Some kids would work the mill over the summer. They'd come back and be able to bench press 100 pounds more.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Certainly a lot.
And it was funny with him, because I remember when I got my first job, we all dream of the greatest first job ever, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And so my first job was very hard. It was a brand new school. I had 5 or 6 kids in my first ensemble. And I remember calling my dad. I'm like, oh man, this is just, the kids don't listen, and it's this and that. And I remember he's like, you know what? He's like, think about it this way. Those kids are there to play music, and they deserve someone better than you complaining about that. And he's like, I don't want to hear any more of the negativity of that. I want to hear you calling me back and talking about the successes that you're having in that program. And he's like, I don't want to hear it. He's like, they deserve better. Be better. I was like, okay, not a problem.
Certainly. So what are 3 words you would use to describe an outstanding leader of a comprehensive music program?
Caring. Passionate's a word that's thrown out a lot. You have to use that, because you have to love and you have to be passionate about what you're doing. And I think the other thing too is approachability. Your kids need to understand, especially collegiate kids, because they're getting ready for the rest of their lives with you. And so you have to be approachable, and they have to know, like my kids know they can come to my office and talk about anything they want at any time, as long as I'm there. And if not, they know they can shoot me an email or something and then set up an appointment and we'll be there. But you have to be approachable and available to your kids, and making them feel comfortable and safe about what they're going to go get ready to go do. So I would say those 3 things: approachability, caring, passionate. All other things, you have to be organized, of course, and all of that. But I think those are the 3 most important things in my opinion.
So if you were to offer any advice to any music educator, whether they be band, choir, or orchestra, what general advice would you give to educators to help their students thrive?
It's okay to not know. It's okay to not know what you're doing. It's not okay to not then ask for help. And so a lot of us go into that first year, and it's just like a deer in the headlights, and it's like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And they won't ask for help, or they'll be embarrassed to ask for help. And I tell my kids all the time, I'm like, you're going to not know a lot of things, or you're going to forget a lot of things, or you're going to even forget how to conduct, because you're going to be so nervous and you're going to be out there. It's okay to not know. It's okay to sort of fail at things. But how are we picking ourselves up? How are we asking for help? How are we using our resources, your university professors, school mentors, and things like that? How are we using then to sort of succeed and learn from what we didn't know at first? But the important thing is, you're not going to know everything. And you have to understand that that's okay, because you're not supposed to.
So now you can answer this in the context of your current students at Towson, or even if you were still in secondary education as maybe, say, a high school band director. When the time comes for you to retire, or even when a student leaves your program upon graduation, how would you like to be remembered as a leader for your music program?
I think the best thing that happens is I have a lot of alumni that come back and play with the band. I haven't been at Towson very long. I've been there, this is my 5th year. But even when I was a high school band director, one of the first things the kids would do at the private school that I taught at when they would come back and visit is they would send me an email and say, hey, can I come back and play with the band? Can I come back and sit in an orchestra? And so that to me really shows that, yes, they're coming back to visit, but this was an important thing in their lives that they want to come back and be a small part of again. And so I want my kids to think when they leave that they always have a place to come back to and someone to talk to if they need it.
Certainly, and that's really cool to hear that communal approach towards your program. So
yes.
That wraps up all of our questions now. So again, Dr. Cicconi, I'd like to thank you very much for all of your time and insight, and it's been a very great episode, very great to speak with you and learn some new ideas. And just very much, again, thank you very much for your time and help.
Well, I can't thank you enough for inviting me on for this podcast. It's been a real pleasure and an honor, so thank you.
This concludes our episode. Many thanks to Dr. Christopher Cicconi for sharing his insight and ideas on being a leading educator, conductor, and advocate in the field of music education. If you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to like our page on Facebook under Director Circle and to also subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google Play Music, iHeartRadio, or Spotify to stay updated on all future episodes. This is Doug Conrad saying thank you for listening, and be sure to tune in to the next edition of Director's Circle.